Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of the Thought Square podcast. In last discussion we had with Brother Abdullah was regarding the history of atheism and how it intervened into the Muslim land, right? Atheism, secularism, or similar ideologies where you can say, leave off Islam, right, and adopt any other ideology besides it. So today we will be discussing the ideology of atheism itself. Welcome again, Brother Abdullah. How are you doing?
Barakallahu feekum. Pleasure to be back with you guys.
How's your summer going on in Pakistan? Mashallah.
Well, all things have a cause, and I've been trying to not cause my stomach any problems by limiting my food intake until it's better, inshallah.
Inshallah.
The cause is contingent on all right, the food, right? Anyhow, so let's begin the topic with understanding what is atheism. When we say the word atheism, what are we implying in this discussion anyway, right? So because some people even incorporate deism into the idea of atheism, right? So for example, if you can say the intervention part, if God is not intervening, it's the same as saying that God is not there, right? So some also put that into the definition of atheism as well. So what's your take? What is the standard definition of atheism? What we can go about?
I mean, you guys have probably seen tons and tons of YouTube videos of atheists pontificating about. There's not all atheists believe that there is no God. We just have no evidence to believe in a God. Lack of belief. And so you might say soft atheism, hard atheism, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, the general thing is they say soft atheism is where they simply lack a belief in God. They don't say that he necessarily doesn't exist. They'll say, like we don't say that there's not a teapot orbiting the sun, as Richard Dawkins say. We just lack a belief in it. We have not seen sufficient evidence. We're not saying that it's not the case. We might discover that's the case. There's a teapot orbiting the sun, and we might discover that the God is the case. But at the moment, we lack belief due to insufficient evidence. Would be their headline definition of that. And then you have on the other side the hard atheists who say that not only do I lack belief in God, but I would assert that there actually is no God. Rather than I simply lack a belief, I will then posit a truth claim of reality.
So what would be the difference between a soft atheist and an agnostic, right?
Well, many people often say, I think Richard Dawkins said that in a sense, being an atheist is like 99% agnosticism, where he simply says, I don't know whether God exists or not, but that's the basis for why I don't believe God exists, because I don't have any knowledge, and therefore I lack knowledge, and therefore I lack belief, because knowledge would be the same as belief.
So wouldn't that be an argument from ignorance? If you're ignorant about something, so would that be a valid claim?
Well, indeed, like if someone says, many kids might, as they're learning, say, I don't know why planes stay up in the air, even though they're heavier than air. Therefore, I lack belief that planes can stay up in the air, or they'd say, I lack belief that the wings will actually work, right? They stay up there for other reasons. Whatever. It's ridiculous. No one would say that. You say, well, just because you're ignorant on something doesn't mean, doesn't entitle you to lack a belief in something. At least say that you don't know, and so it's possible, and it's possible, and it may not be possible. So you can't say I lack belief in God, but because you can't discount him either
as an option, right?
Yeah, because if you see an unexplained phenomenon, and it could be explained one of two ways according to what you might feel, although we'd argue it only one way it can be explained, but then you, in a sense, believe in the possibility of both, and you can't discount it. No one would. So let's say you're walking into a forest one day. You enter into a forest, and you see there's a guy, a dead body of a guy, fresh cadaver, ripped into shreds by a wild animal. Okay. You didn't see the wild animal that did it. You're going to say, oh, well, I didn't see the wild animal that did it, therefore I lack a belief in a wild animal being on the loose that can do that, and I'll just continue merrily walking my way into the forest, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't need to see the animal to know if it was a lion or a tiger or whatever. You'd say, you know what, something ripped this guy into shreds, and I'm going to have a fear response based on the possibility that there is a wild animal that's still present in this forest that's going to rip me to shreds. You can't say, well, I didn't see the animal that did it, so I lack fear. Well, then you'd say, no, you lack sense, right? Right.
So why do you believe there is a bit anxiety about this, how they're structuring this definition? In lack.
Because I suppose it's trying to get maybe to make a point against theists to argue that, look, you guys, what they want to say is they want to, in essence, make themselves out to be without at the risk of kind of repeating something I've said in the past, which became a meme in a way. They want to be special, okay, right? And what I mean by this is they say a theist is someone that makes a truth claim with no evidence. A hard atheist makes a truth claim with no evidence. You're saying that we deny God's existence, that we're saying that God does not exist because you want to be equal to us. But no, we transcend that. We are soft atheists. We are special. We don't make any truth claims. Right? That's why they like to, I suspect.
I have a question, and this is again, I'm pulling you back to the history, even though I know we just finished off the history.
I'll try and be brief this time.
Inshallah, may Allah bless you. Barakallah fikum. So the question that I had in mind was that what is the difference between the classical form of atheism and the modern form of atheism? Are they, the idea of ilhad that we used to study in the Islamic sciences, and they had different arguments with the, we have the famous argument with the Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and those people. So do you think there is, this is exactly the same thing, or do you think that there were differences to a certain extent? Because in those times, the circumstances were different, the questions were different. People mainly challenged philosophically and ideologically, but today it's not about ideology or philosophy. It's more of a, science or observation, that's my question.
Well, it's a good question. Are they the same things? In some ways, I'd say, it's actually a biblical quote, there's nothing new under the sun. As in, no kufr is new in a way. It's just...
قلوبهم, as the Quran says.
Yes. It just is recycled in a new label, has a new packaging, but it's the same content. The first, I think maybe the first time we hear the word atheist, at least in the European languages, it was an accusation against Socrates, because he was accused of being godless, ateo, no theo, God, because he was accused of corrupting the youth and being godless. Because he didn't seem to subscribe to the gods of the city of Athens. Now many atheists who try to claim, well, Socrates is one of us. Actually, no, because he uses the word theo a lot. He uses the word, and it's the definitive one, the definitive article for the singular, actually, theo. He uses actually quite a lot. And then some Christians try to say, actually, he was one of us. He was like a Hanif, you could say, right? The point being is that they called him an atheist or godless because he didn't believe in the gods of the Athens, and he was viewed to be corrupting youth by veering them away because he was always asking questions and being skeptical about it. So this is where you see this term occur. So he's not a real true atheist in that sense. But what you see throughout history is occasionally you see people who say, I question society, I want to be different. I'm just people who just in essence question anything.
Cynical or skeptical to a certain extent.
It's more like, perhaps, I think psychologically speaking, you'll get people that want to be different, want to do something different, maybe forge their own path in society and not be a conformist. And for that reason, they start to question everything in society, including the socially accepted idea that there's a God. And you might see that occurring in the past. So this is really where you might see. But in the ancient world, the idea of being actual godless, actually not even believing in anything, was actually associated with barbarians. Because civilized people, civilizations believed in God. They believed in the gods or God, if depending on which civilization you were. and the god or gods was part of the ordering of the universe, was part of how everything was there. It made a comprehensive and cohesive whole. The laws, the morals, the culture, everything was based on this comprehensive whole. In essence, it was everyone had a deen, and believing in that there was a higher agency was part of everyone's deen, because if you don't believe that the universe or anything in it is ordered by agency, then it is chaos. And chaos is what the barbarians and nomads, that's what they would claim. And that's basically where people assumed that atheism belonged to people who were without morals and people who didn't believe in any religion or any belief system. But they never built anything. They never built civilization. That's what was viewed as. And so that's kind of the circumstance. So you either get the oddball, as we call it, the oddball in the society that said, I'm going to be nonconformist and I'm going to be a consistent nonconformist, so I'll not conform to anything in my society, including the belief in God. Or you'll get, as to whether they were barbarians that were complete atheists or so on is debatable or disputable, but it was assumed that this is what nomads and barbarians, uncivilized people believe in. That's where you could see the atheism located in the discourses of the ancient world.
That's why we don't see them quite common in the books of the classical scholars, because the word ilhad does not specifically mean atheism. In fact, it's simply deviation. And the term ilhad was used for many people who had certain heresies in their aqidah, but they did not actually, the creedal issues but they were not actually outright rejection of God, in fact. So that's quite pleasing.
All right. So coming next to that, right? So why do you believe the people adopt this and not just that the people, there are many people who adopt non-conformist views, or they want to be odd ones out, right? And they can simply not follow religion, right? They already do that. For example, if somebody wants to, they start, they become more materialist, right? And they get more into, drugs and whatnot, they can do that, right? They can be non-conformist, right? But ideologically, what pushes somebody, right, to opt an atheistic position, right, and not you can say a simple non-conformist, right, in terms of actions and other ideas?
Well, I had actually a little thought about non-conformists, and this might explain, Rich Dawkins, before I answer your question. It just came to me, so I wanted to quickly say it. The Western philosopher Hegel talked about the servant-master dichotomy. The servant under the master, he hates his master, and he wants to fight against his master and resist his master. But in doing so, in being so obsessed, he still defines his world according to his master, just being different. Right? So the nonconformist, by wanting to be nonconformist, is still trapped by defining their world according to those that they must be different from.
Yes.
Well, just do what you want to do. Why? No, I can only do what is not what these people are doing. Then they are the definition and basis for your life. Then they still stay that way.
Just like an ex-Muslim, right?
So you just have to deny
they have
what
it in
they
their
believe
profile, ex-Muslim, atheist, and whatnot.
Yeah,
right?
and it defines them. They are still controlled and constrained by that which they're obsessed with. Right? Okay, so just throw that out there anyway. Okay, so why would people be atheist in today? Now, I know that there are people who might be generally confused, and I don't want to demean or insult them. A lot of people are genuinely lost. And I don't want to simply say it's a psychological problem or what have you, because sometimes they might encounter questions they find hard to answer. They might say the problem of evil, as it's called, it's not really a problem for me or any Muslim, but they'll say, any Muslim that has reflected upon and understood it and sought answers in the Quran and Sunnah, they say, well, I was told that God is all merciful, and if the universe has aspects which are harsh or brutal, this contradicts God being all merciful, and therefore there's no God. So either he's evil or there's no God, and that's what goes the argument. So it might be that confuses people. Whereas I often say, and maybe this would need advice to your audience, whenever they ever have any doubts about anything in Islam, every time I've ever had something that would resemble anything remotely like a doubt in Islam, as I was learning about Islam growing up and what have you, I always discovered there was an assumption I had made that made me look like it was a contradiction. I was putting my assumption into Islam and then seeing a contradiction. But really, it's like, actually, if I take my assumption out, it seems perfectly fine. Right? And in this case, the assumption is, they say, God is all merciful, as in that he can't do anything except be mercy. He can't punish, he can't create, the only thing he does is be merciful. He only has one thing he can do.
And again, a very crude form of definition of mercy, not a truest form of definition, which is actually the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines it.
So that might be one way, but there's a more commonplace way, and which is, there is a deen, but most people don't realize it's actually a complete. Deen can be a complete way of life and be false, by the way, but it is a complete deen. It talks about everything. It has a view on everything, hence a complete deen, even if it's a false deen and has contradictions. And that is called liberalism. Do you ever wonder why people, so when they say liberalism, they use the word secular liberalism? In fact, isn't that a tautology? Like, just use the word liberalism. Why have to add another word to it? Why? There's a reason why. Secular liberalism is liberalism applied to the political sphere. But if you take the same creed, which is individualism, i.e., there's nothing greater or more sovereign than the individual, meaning the individual controls their own body and is their own absolute master, to be more precise. There is another facet of liberalism. It's called religious liberalism. That's why secular liberalism and religious liberalism, they both come from this same creed. They're just applied in different fields. Religious liberalism, they're the kind of people who believe in that, or they'll be the kind of people that say, I don't think hell can be eternal. Actually, why is there? I don't think God can punish you for simply having different beliefs. They could say maybe God will punish people in a hell for rape and murder because liberalism says that's haram, right? Yeah. So okay, that makes sense, but it can only be a finite punishment, and it's only for where someone has done something against the consent of someone else. They're the kind of people that say, if you are a sociable person, you're a good person. You're a good atheist, mushrik, doesn't matter. You're a good person because you're sociable. Right, as in that's what they call a good person. They say, how can this person I know is so sociable and friendly? How can they go to hell? They're nice. They're so nice. And it's like, well, there's a difference between being sociable and actually fulfilling your purpose in life and rejecting your very creator. That's, you can be sociable and still do those things, right? And that's wrong inherently. But the religious liberals say it can't be, because you haven't done something against someone else, physical harm against their will or consent. So you can't be a bad person, right? And in essence, they make God now a liberal God, okay? But religious liberalism, as much as it tries to reconcile God with liberalism, that's what they are trying to do with it. And religion with its Christianity or Islam, they try to reconcile that with liberalism. As I think it is Dostoevsky, do correct me. No, it's Mikhail Bakunin. He said, as long as there's a master in heaven, we will be slaves on earth. And he didn't say it in a positive way. Ultimately, as a liberal, the core aqidah of liberalism is, you as an individual are your own absolute master. Okay, God is viewed as, God could exist, but God doesn't interfere in your life in the sense of telling you to do things that you don't want to do, right? As long as he can give you commands to say, don't harm the other person against their will, because he's a liberal God, right? But he can't tell you must to pray to me and it must be this way. It must be this way, this way, this way. That's why a religious liberal will say, you can pray to God any way you want. You can relate to God any way you want, right? Because I said liberal God. But gradually they will realize, the religious liberal will realize, or just anyone who's adopted liberalism, that, well, all these revelations, God isn't liberal. I've adopted liberalism, and you've persuaded me that God is the God of liberalism. But when I go to the revelations, which you say, which you don't deny are from God, or you're not contending it, God doesn't look liberal to me. And then in the Old Testament, New Testament, the Quran, and so on, looks pretty non-liberal. And once they come to that realization, and then they see God's commands go against liberal commands, and if liberal commands is the definition of justice, then God's commands must be unjust. But then if you can't have an unjust God, and therefore you can't have a God. And that, I mean, I've summarized it and whatever, but psychologically speaking, people who adopt liberalism realize that they have one more master to get rid of other than themselves, and it's God. That's why if they adopt feminism, which is in essence liberalism for women, to put it crudely, or there's different madahib, I'm not going to get too much into that, but feminism, liberalism, whatever, it's no surprise, or Marxism, when they adopt these things, eventually they become atheists, because these things make humans to be the master, and eventually they realize, but wait a second, I was told to believe there's one master above me. I need to get rid of that master to be truly free. And the reason why many of these atheists, these new atheists, and Daniel Dennett and Rich Dawkins, whatever what they would say and what they have said, and Christopher Hitchens, is that the reason why they're ranting is because they want to free people from this last false master and make them, in order to free them, to make them masters of themselves. They're liberals.
Right. So, in context of the, what do you think that would be the assumptions of atheism, right? So core assumptions of what an atheist would adopt, in a sense. What we already covered right now is that, for example, that they will adopt a system like freedom towards the individualism. Individualism is an idea that most atheists hold, right? What else are the assumptions of atheism, right? What do they assume that, in order to be this part of this, you can say, group?
I mean, ultimately, look, when it comes to investigating the physical world, we usually adopt methodological naturalism with the possibility of the supernatural. Although I don't like to use the word naturalism and supernatural, as I was telling you before the podcast, because everything's natural. Everything that exists is natural. So in essence, quote unquote, God is natural by that logic. Although I don't like using the word natural anyway. So I don't like that word. But the term, the Western phrase, the Western terminology is methodological naturalism. When I do an experiment, I assume there's purely material causes and mechanisms, unless otherwise. We always leave the possibility that there could be something that we can't see in microscopes that might be involved there. Okay. But the atheist makes the assumption that no, the universe is complete in itself. It is sufficient. It is self-sufficient in essence as an explanation for itself.
So first is that it is a self-sufficient explanation for itself, the world and the universe, right? So basically the assumption of naturalism, right? This nature or this world is all there is. Is that the first assumption?
In essence, you'd have to assume. Now, I know some atheists might say, "Well, I don't assume anything. I just say that I haven't seen the evidence yet." But you have to assume that the universe is complete and self-sustaining. So by complete meaning, it doesn't need to be sustained from outside itself, and doesn't need to be created from outside itself. As in it's both self-sufficient in space and time. Right, so not started, not created. So if you might say it will create itself, if you want to go that way, create itself from nothing. And some atheists might say, well, you never saw it, so how do you know? And so on and so forth. But the idea that the universe is a sufficient explanation for itself is generally what most atheists subconsciously have to assume in order for them to say that they lack any need of God as an explanation in their worldview. And I suppose when I was arguing against cosmic skeptic all the way back in the day, I said that it's not simply like you're walking around one day in the universe and you're saying, well, I don't know if a fairy exists until I see it pop out. And the universe is vast, maybe here, it's there in this corner, what have you. But this is not the same. You're saying that the entire universe by itself doesn't require explanation beyond it, and yet you haven't seen the limits of the universe, you haven't seen what's underneath it or behind it, what have you. So therefore you actually are making an assumption, you're making a claim that the universe is completely self-sufficient. You don't know that's the case.
All right, so what are some of the replies to this, right? If somebody opts this or makes this claim of naturalism, or so what can we respond to it?
Well, I spent, a long period of time trying to, I looked at some of the philosophical arguments, but I really wanted to, let's say, homegrown my own
Argument.
because the philosophers, they didn't have access to reality more than I do, or any one of us. So why do we need to rely on their syllogistic constructions? Okay, so I looked into we might call the Kalam cosmological argument and the argument from contingency, and I thought there has to be, you can't have a universe of only contingent things, contingent facts. There has to be ultimately something that's not contingent. Even atheists might say, yeah, sure, but it is
not necessary that thing is God.
You need a necessary thing. Yeah, they might say this, or they say, well, there might be a start point to the universe of the Big Bang, but maybe the universe that they acknowledge there's a problem with infinite regress fallacy. If we had to wait an infinite amount of time before we end this podcast, we would never end this podcast. And so to get to the point of ending this podcast, there would have to be a start point somewhere. So you can't have an infinite past. They might acknowledge this. And some might even say, well, they try to make arguments of using, not using maths, but they try to muddy the waters a little bit. But there's no getting around the infinite regress fallacy. So what they'll say simply is that, well, maybe the universe caused itself in a loop, or a whole bunch of things, which is still a circular reasoning, quite literally. But I distilled an argument against atheists to two basic principles of reality: space and time. Okay, and I actually say it's a Quranic argument. All right, I've always said the best arguments are in the Quran, and I always felt strange why do we have to invent something? The creator of the universe, couldn't you have not said this and told us these things? And it's actually in the Quran, and I'll tell you where it is afterwards. Okay, so if I forget, ask me to. So, okay, let's start with time. All right, you can't have an infinite past. It has to begin somewhere. If it started somewhere, what does the initiation of it? So you have something that doesn't, a state of no motion to motion. There has to be an initiation of that. You can't say what causes initiation, a prior state. Well, no, because this is the beginning. So there's nothing prior to the beginning. So then whatever initiates motion or initiates change, what we call time, is something which is outside of time, or is not a prisoner to time, shall we say,
exactly, for sure.
and can do so acausally, i.e. nothing causes it to start time, otherwise then something behind that. Yeah. So if it can cause things and nothing forces it to do it, what's the only explanation left? It does it by choice.
It does it by choice.
And anything that has a choice has irada, will, right? Simple, by the will. Yeah. That's time in a nutshell. Then what about, I say space? And this is a very interesting one. So remember, you probably heard of Zeno's paradoxes.
Yes.
Right. Most people don't realize. So Zeno tried to point it out that, there's between any 2 points, there's actually an infinite amount of infinitesimal points. How do you get from A to B at all? Arrows and tortoises and so on. He used, a rabbit, I think it was. The rabbit tortoise is a separate story. But what people don't, and he also pointed out that I can take this glass and I can cut it in half, and I can cut that in half, and I cut that in half, and cut that in half, and half, and I can keep doing that at forever. Now, if I get to the smallest unit, what is uncuttable, atomos, not cuttable, it still has two sides, one left side, one right side, and theoretically it's still cuttable, right? And so on. But if you're saying that there is no fundamental uncuttable thing, and you can cut it down infinitely, then you're saying that reality is made of an infinite amount of cuttable things, which means it's made of an infinite amount of nothing. But then where does something come from? From nothing. Now, Zeno was actually arguing, he was following, he was actually trying to defend his teacher, you could say, Parmenides, I believe it is, who actually argued that reality didn't make sense, and reality was actually an illusion. What you're seeing is an illusion, and really everything is a static universe where everything's the same thing and whatever. I'm not going to get too much into that. The Eleatic school. So he was actually trying to argue that you can't trust your senses because things don't make sense, right? But I kind of got inspired and I think, wait a second. That thing about being able to cut things down infinitely. Space is made of extension, right? Right? It's not an absolute nothing. If that absolute nothing is non-existence, right? And you can't go through non-existence to get to another side because you can't go, there doesn't exist. So everything actually, so what we call extension is not of emptiness, it's of space, right? Which we call space now. Okay, what's it made out of? Cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half, half. Either, again, it's made out of something that you can't cut, a small amount of let's call it, some people call it Planck space, you could say, currently the model.
Higgs field or Planck space?
So it's a Planck space, the smallest unit of space that the equations of physics make sense, right? The current that we want to have. Okay, but that's an extension of what? An extension of something, okay? Now, if you say, oh, well, actually, no, because I can cut it infinitely, because I can theoretically, even if I can't physically cut it, I can cut it, I can divide it. Imagine that they're separated and separated and separated. Does the right side depend on the left side to exist? You know, if you say they does, then it's circular. If you say it's independent, then that means theoretically it can be cut, right? So I can keep going like this. This leads to paradox or contradiction. Either reality is made out of an infinite amount of nothing, or it's made out of a small unit of something, but that can still be cut anyway. And so what's going on? I have a solution. I realize there's a solution to this actually, subhanAllah. The smallest unit of something that we have, the smallest unit of substance, is made out of, is extended, is an extension of Allah's sustaining power. Allah creates and extends. The Quran says, of course, He's the extender. He extends, right? He to maybe use an example is, you know, you have a projector projecting on the screen. Okay, there's nothing physical on the wall, on the screen itself, but the light is projecting a shape on the screen. So to use an analogy, and it's just an analogy for to understand the concept, but I'm not saying this is the mechanism or actually how it works, is the smallest unit of reality is insufficient to explain itself. Therefore, there is something behind the smallest unit of reality, which is sustaining it and by its power. And of course, if there's nothing more fundamental than that thing, and it's doing so with no compulsion, because if it's fundamental, it doesn't have any internal mechanisms that makes it forces it to do it, then it has a will, and it is sustaining reality by choice. So space shows that the universe is insufficient to sustain itself and must be sustained by a sustainer. And time shows that the universe is insufficient to initiate itself and must be initiated by someone, something else. So time and space. That's a beautiful
argument, by the way. MashaAllah.
Now, I'll end with this. Why do I say it's a Quranic argument? What does the Quran say? There's two main verses that say this. In the creation of the heavens and the earth is a physical object, but the heavens is space. In the creation of the heavens and earth and the alternation of time, of night and day, these are signs for those who reflect. The heavens and the earth, space and matter within it, space and substance. The alternation of night and day, what was the basic means of measuring time? Was time. The first was the sun and its alternation night and day. In space and time are signs for those who reflect. It's a Quranic argument.
Abdullah, there is one thing I think that's quite philosophical to a certain extent. I don't know, I would be able to explain that to you, to pose a question to you. And that question is that your argument for the space, somehow posits that the ultimate end of any substance is actually non-substance. Something that is not substance. Of course, when we say the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so of course somehow we're not actually making it something like kind of substance. But from your argument, something it implies that the ultimate the reality of material existence is immaterial. Is that what you're positing?
No. Well,
I mean, there is a
I'll
point where
say
they do
yes
they
and
do
no.
connect to a
I'll
certain
say,
extent.
so for the creator, let's go back to time. Seems very clear. Seems easy to as a
it's
concept.
easier
Yeah?
than that. Yeah.
But to initiate change from when there's no change, there has to be a point. If you're going to change reality, you're adding something or
Yeah.
subtracting. Okay.
Fair enough.
Something's coming into existence or out of existence. The issue is that something comes from nothing or
I got it, got your
out
point.
of nothing, but
So ultimately-
not by nothing.
Not by that.
Right. When it comes to substance is being created or sustained from nothing, but not by nothing. And that's the point. I used it in my argument against Matt Dillahunty, the American atheist guy, and I said the problem with you can't explain substance in your worldview. What is behind it? Because physics ultimately it measures motion. All it does is it talks about gives equations of emotion. Emotion of what? And then I say, the atom. But that's just the motions of subatomic particles, and that's just the motions of, if you dive down, quarks and bosons, which are force carriers, which are the motions of fields. Of oscillations in fields. Sure, fields of what? Of what?
Ultimately.
And I say the problem with your worldview, that Matt Dillahunty is, and your arguments is, it lacks substance.
I think that's a mic drop scene.
So yeah,
That's quite intelligent, by the way.
but
mashallah.
it's in the Quran. Every time I think, remember when many of us, when growing up, we read that verse, the alternation of night and day, and I wondered, what was the alternation of night and day? Is it a sign because the Earth is not tidally locked to the sun, so we have the Earth spins on its axis? Is that the sign that's talking about? Which, in a sense, that allows life, because if we were tidally locked, we'd only exist around a type of a kind of equatory type thing. But I thought, is that it? I bang my head against it. Like, I'm trying to understand, why is alternation of time and day a sign? Right? I say, but how do you measure time? The alternation of night and day. Yes, that's where it comes. That's our basic idea of time is something a rotational system that is uniform and uniformly resets to its original configuration. That's our basis to measure time.
Fair enough, inshallah.
So I think we should end it here. Jazakallah khair, Brother Abdullah, for showing a lot to patience with us.
Can I
Well,
just
I think
ask
you guys
one
should
last?
not patient with me.
Can I just ask one last question? I think
Please.
it's quite
Yeah,
practical
sure,
for the viewers as well.
Sure.
So my question is, normally we Muslims and theists actually argue that the primary cause of atheism itself is not any idea or intellectual argument. It's emotion primarily. So primarily they're influenced by their emotions, and these are emotional arguments, and they're unable to somehow reconcile their circumstances, for example, their situation, especially in the case of problem of evil, for example. So they cannot actually reconcile the idea of God with their situation. So somehow they, adopt an escape strategy and they become atheist. So my question to you is that, with your experience specifically, do you think that to a certain extent it's true if someone says that if we theists say that the majority atheists are atheists because of their emotional problems and not their intellectual or ideological problems? Is that true, ultimately?
To give a brief answer, I'll simply say all error comes from assumptions.
Okay.
It's dhann, as the Quran says. It's our speculation, which is the cause of error. The emotional side comes from us defending the error when we realize there's a contradiction, rather than removing the error. So it's not, emotions is not the cause of it. Emotions is what rather people's free will and things like sunken cost fallacy. I've put so much into this or whatever, but it ultimately comes from an assumption and the unwillingness, for a number of reasons, to challenge that assumption and to remove it. If you want to believe that God is a liberal God and he wants you to have pleasure, but then there's pain in the universe, the natural instinct, the natural intellectual, inclination is to say, okay, well, my model of God being liberal is false, right? No, liberalism I can't challenge. I like liberalism, I enjoy it, what have you. I've committed to it. I can't imagine life without it. So I can't change that. So I'm going to change the other factor in that, God. Then there's no God. I'll say I want to keep a liberal worldview, at least for myself as a human and other humans. So I'm going to remove God from the equation, as opposed to, well, actually, maybe liberalism isn't how we're meant to live as humans, and maybe the universe isn't under a liberal order. And they might say, okay, yeah, I'm not saying the universe is liberal, but I want to live as a liberal. I want to follow my desires and be a slave to my desires, and unwittingly a slave to anyone that can manipulate and control and influence my desires. I want to do that. And in a sense, that's what leads to the atheism.
There is an emotional investment in something that they have experienced in their life, and they have opted an idea. For example, a feminist, right? She might have, or he might have opted this ideology, which has helped his or her worldview in some capacity, right? And this, since then, it has to be true no matter what, right? So there is an investment, emotional investment associated with that. And if it is refuted, right? They say if this is refuted, then, for example, Islamic feminism, right? So if they say if this is refuted, then Islam is also not valid, or things of that sort. Some kind of, just the example you gave, right?
Yeah. Or they'll say, oh, religion is courageous to control people, or to give privilege to men, or what have you. So the only way I can break free of that as a liberal is to deny the religion itself and God, as opposed to question my assumptions. And I must stress, by the way, also, some people are affected by the negative behavior and also the misunderstanding of Muslims or Christians who themselves actually aren't following their own religion, but only use the religious words when it supports them. And they think, oh, that must mean that religion is only a tool of control, as opposed to, no, these people are manipulating religion, like politicians would manipulate whatever, to get what they want. Many humans manipulate and find leverage anywhere they can. They'll call for values when it suits them, and they'll won't care about those values when it doesn't suit them. That's a part of the human condition of many human beings. It's not to do with religion. Don't take it personal against Islam or Christianity. But because they want to make that assumption, no, I want to deny religion. I want to believe in a conspiracy theory that religion is about control. That makes me feel better, and I'm going to reject religion because of that. So it's these assumptions and the emotion of wanting to protect these assumptions and not actually challenge them.
Jazakallah khair again, Brother Abdullah and Brother Mughir Al-Kuman. Thank you very much. Inshallah, we'll meet in the next episode of Thought Square podcast with another interesting guest. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.